Good evening, everybody. I am supremely sorry for the late start this evening. I apologize. Normally we get started at 6:30, and I am 15 minutes late, and I'm extremely sorry, everybody. So our daily devotional today is coming from an article that was posted today. It's kind of an interesting article. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but they think they found Herod's palace. This is not Herod the Great. This is Herod the Great's son, who was involved in killing John the Baptist. And they found the palace that they think this is where he was. And they think they may have even found the place where Herodias's daughter danced, and it pleased Herod, and he told her, whatever you want, I'll give you. And she says, after her mother helps her to know what to ask, they ask for John the Baptist's head on a platter. So here's a picture of what they think is kind of the situation where perhaps the throne would have been. Archaeologists believe that this niche represents the remains of the throne of Herod Antipas. From here, the decision to execute John the Baptist may have been made. And there's part of the article, the latter half of the article, kind of focuses on whether or not, from an archaeological point of view, whether or not this is likely to have been where his throne was and so forth. It's kind of interesting. Some people say that, yeah, this is likely that it was. Some are like, well, we're not really sure. But regardless, there's a couple things said in this article that I'm a little... it's kind of interesting how they phrase it. Archaeologists claim that they have identified the deadly dance floor where John the Baptist, a preacher who foretold the coming of Jesus, was sentenced to death around AD 29. The Bible and the ancient writer Flavius Josephus both describe how King Herod Antipas, son of King Herod, had John the Baptist executed. Josephus specifies that the execution took place at Machaerus, a fort near the Dead Sea in modern-day Jordan. Obviously, the Bible isn't specific in terms of where they were, the place where they were at, in terms of Machaerus or not. But supposedly, Josephus recorded that that's where they were. And Josephus, to be clear, Josephus was a historian. There's a lot of what Josephus says either corroborates what the Bible says, or kind of complements some of the history that's recorded in the Bible. However, keep in mind that Josephus, in fact, a lot of people have a copy of Josephus's works because it provides a little bit of a background in terms of the Jewish politics and the Jewish customs and so forth of the day, and some of the history that was going on. But keep in mind, Josephus was a Jewish historian, and so some of what he recorded and some of the things that he says, there are times where they do contradict what the Bible says. So just kind of be aware of that if you happen to read Josephus. Herod Antipas feared the growing influence of John the Baptist among the population, so he executed him, Josephus wrote. Here's one of the examples of where Josephus, it's contradictory of what the Bible says. Herod Antipas feared the growing influence of John the Baptist among the population. He executed him. The Bible, on the other hand, tells a far more elaborate tale. I kind of take a little bit of exception to that use of phrase there, elaborate tale, claiming that Herod Antipas had John the Baptist executed in exchange for a dance. The biblical story claims that Herod Antipas was set to marry a woman named Herodias, both of whom had been divorced, something that John the Baptist objected to. Well, yes, that's true. John the Baptist did object to it, but not because John the Baptist objected to it, but because God says this is not right. And so I found that interesting that they also make that claim. At their wedding, Herodias' daughter, named Salome, performed a dance that so delighted Herod Antipas that the king promised her anything she wanted as a reward. Salome, goaded on by Herodias, asked for the head of John the Baptist. Herod Antipas was reluctant to grant the request, according to the Bible, but he ultimately decided to fulfill it and had John the Baptist's head brought to Salome on a platter. And so this goes on to describe this courtyard at Machaerus. They think is, if Josephus is accurate in the things that he's recording, that this is where they were during this event, then this courtyard is likely where Salome performed her dance, and so forth. Let's see, after King Herod, this is King Herod the Great's death, his kingdom was divided among his sons, and Herod Antipas controlled a kingdom that included Galilee and part of Jordan. He controlled his kingdom at times from Machaerus. Archaeologists discovered the courtyard in 1980, but they didn't recognize the niche as being part of Herod Antipas' throne until now. And to be clear, further in the article, there are still some archaeologists and historians who they're not 100% convinced that it is part of his throne, but there are some who think that it is. The presence of the throne next to the courtyard solidifies the conclusions about the dance floor, according to Voros. Archaeological team has been reconstructing the courtyard, published several images in the book showing what it looked like around the time of John the Baptist execution. So this is kind of a reconstruction of what it may have looked like at the time. It's not very specific, but again, kind of gives you an idea. So I thought this was kind of an interesting, again, a very non-committal, I guess you could say, in terms of referencing biblical recording, the historicity of what the Bible records, whether or not it's the way they went about this in the article. It's like they were kind of, the Bible kind of records this, so take that with a grain of salt. That's kind of how they are looking at that. At least that's the kind of the feeling that you get when you read this. So in Matthew chapter 14, there's actually the reference to Herodias and John the Baptist and Herod and so forth. It comes in Matthew, Mark, and actually there's even a reference in Luke as well. Matthew and Mark tend to be a little bit more detailed. The situation in Luke, we see John the Baptist making the same, and many other exhortations he preached to the people, but Herod the Tetrarch, being rebuked by him concerning Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, and for all the evils which Herod had done, also added this above all, that he shut John up in prison. And so that was, kind of Luke. He doesn't go in as much detail as Mark and Matthew, but that's why, like I said, we have Matthew here in Matthew chapter 14. Herod the Tetrarch heard the report about Jesus and said to his servants, "This is John the Baptist. He has risen from the dead, and these powers are at work in him." So Herod had already killed, so this is Matthew's account. He had already killed John the Baptist, and this is where Matthew goes kind of into a background describing, okay, this is what had happened. It says, "For Herod had laid hold of John and bound him and put him in prison for the sake of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because John had said to him, 'It is not lawful for you to have her.' And although he wanted to put him to death, he feared the multitude because they counted him as a prophet." So it's interesting because, again, that article kind of painted an interesting picture of the view of how the Bible records this. But you put all of these different accounts together and you kind of get a general idea of what happened. And so Herod, it does sound like Herod was jealous, that he was upset at John the Baptist's influence among the people. He did want to kill him, but he was afraid that the people, because the people referred to him or considered him, John the Baptist, a prophet, Herod did not do that. But then in verse 6, when Herod's birthday was celebrated, the daughter of Herodias danced before them and pleased Herod. That's Salome, or Salome. Therefore he promised with an oath to give her whatever she might ask. So she, having been prompted by her mother, said, "Give me John the Baptist's head here on a platter." And the king was sorry. Nevertheless, because of the oaths and because of those who sat with him, he commanded it be given her. I don't think he was sorry about killing John the Baptist. I don't think that's what the situation was. I think he was sorry that he had made that oath, because it kind of forced his hand in a situation where it was wiser in terms of the population, the people around him, not to do this. But because he had made this oath, and because of those who sat with him, they heard him make that oath that he would give her whatever she wanted, he had it done. So he sent and had John beheaded in prison. His head was brought on a platter and given to the girl, and she brought it to her mother. And so that's Matthew's account. But then we have Mark's account. And like I said, all of these accounts go hand in hand. None of these accounts contradict the other or anything like that. So as Jesus is out preaching and teaching, he's performing miracles and so forth. Verse 14 of Mark chapter 6. "Now King Herod heard of him, for his name had become well known, and he said, 'John the Baptist is risen from the dead, and therefore these powers are at work in him.'" This is Herod apparently making this statement. And verse 15, "Others said it is Elijah, others said it is the prophet, or like one of the prophets. But when Herod heard, he said, 'This is John, whom I beheaded. He has been raised from the dead.'" So it's interesting that John the Baptist, or that Herod he's convinced that John has risen from the dead. And it suggests that there is a little bit of fear here from John the Baptist, or from Herod, of John the Baptist. Again, it never says that Herod had been convinced that John the Baptist was a prophet in Matthew or in Luke, but that he was afraid to kill John the Baptist because the people regarded him as a prophet. Well, now that Jesus is performing these miracles and so forth, news is reaching Herod, and now this has now convinced Herod, or at least, at this point, oh no, he really was a prophet, and he really was from God, and God raised him from the dead. Verse 17, "For Herod himself had sent and laid hold of John and bound him in prison for the sake of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, for he had married her." Because John, so Mark, out of all the three, gives us the most detail in terms of the dialogue between John the Baptist and Herod. Because John had said to Herod, "It is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife." Notice, it's not that John objects. That's kind of how the article painted this. John the Baptist had a problem with it. The law says, "It is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife." Of course, she was bound to his brother Philip. They apparently divorced for reasons not in accordance with the Old Testament law. She was still bound to Philip, and now Herod had taken her as his own, and he had no right to her. Verse 19, "Therefore Herodias held it against him and wanted to kill him, but she could not." So now we have a little bit even more background here. Again, this is not contradictory of what Matthew and Luke tell us. This is simply additional detail that Herodias had it out for John. It wasn't just that Herod didn't like him, although certainly there seems to have been some fear of his influence from Herod, but that Herodias, because of what John the Baptist said, it wasn't just that Herod had Herodias, but that Herodias had Herod, and Herodias had no right to Herod either. It works both ways there. Herodias was Philip's wife, and she had no right to Herod Antipas, and that upset her. And so she wanted to have him killed, but she could not. Again, verse 20, for Herod feared John, knowing he was a just and holy man, and he protected him. And when he heard him, he did many things and heard him gladly. So it's kind of interesting that you've got this kind of this background here. Again, you put all of these accounts together, and it's not really that Herod Antipas was a believer. I wouldn't go that far as to say that. I wouldn't even necessarily put him in the same category as Felix, who later on in the book of Acts would hear Paul regarding the truth of the gospel, the defense of the gospel, and so forth. I wouldn't say that necessarily that Herod was on that level. However, he was afraid. It does sound like he says he feared John. He also feared the influence that John had among the people. And so there was kind of this duality here. John or Herod, on the one hand, did not appreciate being told he had no right to Herodias. Herodias didn't like it either. But Herod was afraid of John because, first of all, he's regarded as a prophet among the people. He's a just and holy man. The things that he says are from the law. And when he heard him, he did many things and heard him gladly. Verse 20. Verse 21, then an opportune day came when Herod on his birthday gave a feast for his nobles, the high officers, and the chief men of Galilee. And when Herodias' daughter herself came in and danced and pleased Herod and those who sat with him, the king said to the girl, ask me whatever you want, and I will give it to you. He also swore to her, whatever you ask me, I will give you up to half my kingdom. This must have been some dance, okay, gotta say. Apparently must have been some dance to convince him to give her even up to half the kingdom. It's pretty... He may have been a little drunk. You got to maybe figure that too. There might have been some drinking going on here too. Verse 24, so she went out and said to her mother, what shall I ask? And she said, the head of John the Baptist. Immediately she came in with haste to the king and asked, saying, I want you to give me at once the head of John the Baptist on a platter. And the king was exceedingly sorry, yet because of the oaths and because of those who sat with him, he did not want to refuse her. Immediately the king sent an executioner and commanded his head to be brought. And he went and beheaded him in prison, brought his head on a platter and gave it to the girl, and the girl gave it to her mother. So that's Mark's account. Like I said, Mark's account is far more detailed, a little bit more background there, especially showing that the main objection, I guess you could say, was coming from Herodias regarding John the Baptist. Again, Herod Antipas, I would stop short of saying that he was a fan of John the Baptist. Again, I think there was some fear of John, especially because of how the people regarded him. And it says the king was exceedingly sorry. It doesn't say because he liked John. It was because he was afraid of John, and he was afraid of John's influence to a certain extent. But I guess you could make the point that, as the article says, that the king didn't want to kill him. The way the article describes it is because he liked John. I wouldn't go so far as to say he liked him. Again, Matthew's account makes it clear that Herod didn't appreciate the fact that John told him he had no right to Herodias. But there seemed to have been a little bit of wishy-washy, I guess you could say, on behalf of Herod Antipas. He kind of he liked him, but he didn't. He was afraid of him, but he wasn't. It was just one of those kind of weird type of political type of situations, that there was a part of him that probably was worried that if this man truly is from God, if man truly is a prophet, then this could be a problem. And you certainly see that after the fact when he's hearing reports of this man doing these miracles later, and he's convinced it's John the Baptist. He's been raised from the dead, and he's afraid. So it is interesting that you kind of have this, I guess these dual conflicting feelings from Herod regarding John the Baptist. But in the end, it was Herodias primarily who was seeking the head of John the Baptist for sure. So it's kind of an interesting account. It's an interesting situation, and it just goes to show, first of all, that and there's a lot of lessons here. One of them is when you read articles like this, archaeological articles and so forth, take what they say in terms of the historicity of how they view the Bible with a grain of salt. That a lot of times when archaeology and so forth, these things reference the Bible, they're going to reference it as pseudo history. Okay, maybe it's true, maybe it's not, that sort of thing. They approach it from that perspective sometimes, and I don't appreciate that, but that's the way it is. And so it's interesting. You read some of these archaeology articles about things that they find and so forth, and sometimes they're very hesitant, or at least the ones writing the articles are very hesitant to connect it in any way to confirming things that the Bible have said. Secondly, the fact that one of the I guess broader lessons here is the fact that Herod Antipas put himself in a situation that he should not have been in. Okay, and then in many different ways. First of all, he shouldn't have been married or taken Herodias as wife when he had no right to her. According to the law, he had no right. John the Baptist told him. Herod didn't appreciate that. Herodias really didn't appreciate that. But John the Baptist told the truth. Okay, he told them what they needed to hear, and that's a lesson all in itself. The need to tell the truth, preach the gospel, even when it's not going to be received well. But then Herod, again, whether alcohol played a role in this situation or not, this situation that he's in, where he's having this celebration in verse 21, it's his birthday, and so he's got this feast going on, and Salome comes in, she dances, and again, whether it was the dance itself or it was alcohol combining the situation, whatever it was, to have made this oath, I'll give you whatever you want, up to half the kingdom, that really puts you in a situation where you don't have control, and no matter what they ask, because of the people around you, you got to fulfill that oath. And so it's an interesting account, and it's an interesting situation. I think there's a lot to be learned from this whole thing. And certainly, again, going to the three accounts that record the situation, again, Luke has kind of the least to say about it, just kind of a almost in passing type of situation. And then Matthew has a little bit more to say about it, not as much detail, but Mark especially gives us the most detail about the kind of the socio-political situation that was going on, and the pressure being placed on Herod Antipas, and just the things that were happening. And I just think it's a really interesting account, and it's a sad situation, because John the Baptist, obviously this is where he's martyred, he's killed. He's martyred in the sense of he stood for the truth in telling Herod and Herodias what they needed to hear. But it just goes to show, not only in this situation but also with the article itself, to take the Bible for what it says. Okay, there is no contradiction with anything that's said here. It's very human, though, of Herod. I think you see very human. You talk about, well, how could Herod have both of these feelings and these things going on? Well, that's human. Okay, you can be afraid of a person, but also kind of appreciate them at the same time. And there's this, I'm mad at you because you told me I don't have a right to my wife, but at the same time, you're just and holy, and you're teaching the law, and there's this mixture of stuff going on. So anyway, so I just thought that was interesting. I wanted to share that with you guys. Again, I want to apologize for being late this evening. It's not something that happens very often, but I really do apologize. I was 15 minutes late tonight, so I will do my best to make sure that if something's gonna happen, or if I'm having technical difficulties or whatever, to try to it's difficult to let everybody know that I'm running behind in a short time frame like that. But if that happens again, I will definitely try to let everybody know that, hey, give me 10 minutes. There's something come up, or having technical difficulties or something like that. All right, everybody. Lord willing, I'll see you all tomorrow at 6:30 for our next daily devotional. Y'all have a great night. Lord willing, see you tomorrow. Thanks, everybody.